She drove 40 minutes across the city. She balanced a takeout bag on the passenger seat. She texted him, "On my way, bringing the Thai place you like?" He did not respond. She told herself he was busy. He was always busy. She pulled into the hospital parking garage. She got out of the car. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was bringing her husband dinner because she simply wanted to see his face. And then she saw him running, his hand on the small of a woman's back, his jacket on her shoulders, his phone lighting up in that jacket pocket, her name on the screen. And she watched him look at it. She watched him put it away without answering. The baby kicked. Claire stood between two parked cars, and she did not move. And then the world went dark. She fell alone on a cold cement floor. Her husband was 30 feet away. He did not come. Yeah. A stranger held her hand. Not her husband, a stranger. What happens next is not a story about revenge. It is not a story about a woman destroyed. It is a story about a woman who fell in a parking garage and got up and remembered exactly who she was. Stay with her. Every minute of this story is worth it. The lesson this story carries: when someone shows you who they are, in a parking garage, in a silence, in a phone, put back without answering, believe them. And then remember this: the person you become on the other side of that moment is not broken. She is finally, completely free. If this story already has you feeling something, hit like so more women find it. Leave a comment with one word describing how you feel right now. Just one word. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because every story on this channel is built for women who are ready to stop disappearing and start coming home to themselves. The story starts now.
The phone buzzed against marble. Once, twice, 3 times. Silence. Claire Whitmore stood in the underground parking garage of Harmon Medical Center and watched her husband run. Not the frantic run of a man in physical danger. The urgent, purposeful run of a man who is moving towards something that matters to him. His hand was on the small of a woman's back. His hand was guiding her forward. The woman was young and blonde and bent slightly at the waist, breathing in careful, measured pulls. She was wearing his jacket, the charcoal one, the expensive one that Claire had helped him choose at a store in Beverly Hills 14 months ago, standing in the men's department on a Saturday afternoon, laughing at the price tag before they bought it anyway. That jacket was on another woman's shoulders. Claire stood between 2 parked cars with a takeout bag in her left hand and her phone in her right, and she did not move. Her brain did what brains do in the first seconds of catastrophic information. It offered alternatives. It argued. He is helping a colleague. She is a client who became ill. There is an explanation. There is always an explanation. You are 8 months pregnant, and your hormones are... Her thumb moved without her deciding it should. She called him. 20 feet away, through the glass hospital doors, she watched the phone light up in his jacket pocket. His jacket. On that woman's shoulders. She watched Nathaniel Whitmore glance down at the lit screen. She watched his face register something. The name on the screen, her name, and she watched him slide the phone back into that woman's jacket pocket without answering. The takeout bag weighed nothing. The baby kicked, hard, twice, like 2 fists against a door. Claire stood in the cold October air, and something inside her chest went completely still, not the still of peace. The still of a very large structure in the exact moment before it comes apart. She called again. This time he did not reach for the phone at all. He pushed through the emergency doors. The woman went with him. The doors swung closed. The fluorescent white of the hospital interior swallowed them both. Gone. The parking garage smelled like exhaust and cold concrete. The lemongrass from the pad thai she had ordered rose from the bag in thin, warm threads. Somewhere on the level above her, a car alarm beeped once and stopped. Claire stood there. She stood there long enough to understand that she was not moving, that some part of her body had made a decision independent of her mind. She breathed. She told herself to walk forward. She did not walk forward. The paramedic later used the words vasovagal response. He said it the way medical people say things, with a clinical calm that makes the body's betrayal sound managed, categorized, under control. Blood pressure drop, emotional shock combined with third trimester physical strain. The body makes decisions the mind has not yet authorized. She did not feel herself fall. She was standing, and then she was on the cold cement floor of the parking garage, lying between a silver SUV and a concrete pillar. And the takeout container had opened beside her, and the lemongrass smell was stronger now, close to her face, and she had one coherent thought before the edges of her vision went dark. That was good food. And then nothing. The man who found her had a briefcase. Brown leather, brass clasps, the kind that had been expensive once 20 years ago, and now showed honest wear. He dropped it without a moment's hesitation and was on his knees beside her before she had fully opened her eyes. He was shouting for help. His voice carried the full length of the parking level, bouncing off concrete, sharp and certain, and his hand was holding hers. She looked up at him, 60 years old, perhaps. Gray at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a face that had been through things and come out on the other side without bitterness. "Stay with me," he said. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." She stayed with him. She looked at his face, and she breathed, and she stayed. This stranger who had been walking to his car on a Thursday evening and had seen her on the ground and had simply stopped. He asked for nothing. He explained nothing. He just held her hand and stayed until the hospital staff came running out with a wheelchair and their practiced calm and their questions. They asked her name. They asked her due date. They asked if she had lost consciousness and for how long. She answered everything. She answered carefully and precisely the way she always answered things, because she was Claire Whitmore. And being thorough was how she moved through the world, even when the world was ending. They wheeled her through the emergency doors. She did not look for Nathaniel. She already knew he was there. She already knew which direction he had gone. She chose not to look. The emergency bay had a water stain on the ceiling. Someone had painted over it. The new paint was slightly different from the old, a fraction whiter, a touch brighter, and if you looked directly at the spot, you could see the ghost of what had been underneath. The stain was still there. It had simply been covered. Claire lay flat on the gurney and stared at it and thought about the effort of covering something without fixing the source. The fetal monitor beeped. 144 beats per minute. Steady, strong, the baby entirely unbothered by the evening's catastrophe. Good, Claire thought. At least one of us knows what she is doing. Dr. Sandra Phelps arrived in 10 minutes, off duty. The admitting nurse had recognized the name on the insurance card and made a call. Dr. Phelps came through the curtain in street clothes with her stethoscope already out and looked at Claire for 3 full seconds without speaking, which was exactly the right response. "Claire," she said, "baby's heartbeat is strong. Your blood pressure is coming back up. You are both okay." Claire nodded. She could not make words yet. "Is there someone I can call?" Dr. Phelps asked. There was a pause. It lasted long enough that Dr. Phelps noted it. She did not write anything in the chart about the pause, but she noted it. Ruth Calloway, Claire said. Her number is in my phone. She did not say her husband's name. She did not say, he is already here. She did not say, he watched my name on that screen and put the phone away. She said, call Ruth, and she meant it completely. Ruth Calloway arrived in 17 minutes. She worked the maternity floor 2 buildings over, and she ran the whole way, which was not something she normally did voluntarily. She pushed through the curtain and saw Claire, pale, monitored, both hands resting on her belly, alone. And her face did something complicated and rapid that she controlled before Claire could fully read it. Hey, Ruth said. She sat on the edge of the bed and took Claire's hand. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The monitor beeped. The water stain held its ghost shape on the ceiling. He was there, Claire said. Her voice was quiet. Already inside, with her. Ruth said nothing. You knew, Claire said. Not an accusation. A statement. The flat, clear quality of a thing finally named after a long time of going unnamed. I suspected, Ruth said carefully. I did not know. There is a difference. Is there? Claire said. Ruth did not answer. The baby kicked. Ruth put her hand on Claire's belly without asking, the way only a very old friend or a very good nurse would do. She is strong, Ruth said softly. She got that from me, Claire said. And that was the first sentence of this whole terrible story that had something other than pain living inside it. The mirror moment came at 2 in the morning. Ruth had fallen asleep in the chair. Her coffee had gone cold on the tray table. The hospital had settled into its nighttime register. Muffled footsteps, low voices, the sounds of a large building managing its overnight operations. Claire was awake. She reached for her phone. Lock, unlock. Look at the screen. No message. Lock again. Unlock. One more time. Lock. Maybe the call had not gone through. Maybe there was a dead zone in the parking structure. Maybe he had not seen it clearly. Maybe there was something she did not understand yet that would make this into something survivable. She set the phone face down on the tray table. The maybes dissolved. I know what I saw, she thought. I know what his hand on her back means. I know what choosing not to answer means. I have known something was wrong for months. I chose not to see it because seeing it cost more than I could pay all at once. She said it quietly into the fluorescent hum of the room. I am not crazy. I know what I saw. And then the harder one. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along. She made herself say that one out loud, too. It did not make the thing smaller, but it made it real. And real things, she had always found, were easier to carry than the things you were working to keep unreal. He found out she was there at 11:47. A nurse mentioned it between tasks. Your wife was admitted earlier this evening. Bay 7. The nurse would say afterward that she had never seen a man change color quite that way before. He came to the room. Claire was awake. She had considered pretending otherwise. She had thought it through. The closed eyes, the even breathing, forcing him to sit in the silence of what he had done and wait. It appealed to some part of her, but she had decided against it. She was done managing his discomfort. He stepped through the curtain and stopped. She looked at him. 6 years of this face. She knew every language of it. The version for working a room full of investors. The version for genuine laughter that still surprised him when it came. The version for calculation that he thought he kept hidden and did not. This version was new. She had not seen it before. Claire, he said. The baby is fine, she said. Her voice held. She had been working on it for 3 hours in the quiet of the bay, running the sentences she would need through her mind, testing them for stability, setting aside the ones with too much shake in them. She was not going to cry in front of him tonight. That was the line. "We are both fine," she said. "You can go." "I didn't know you were here," he said. "I called you," she said. "You looked at your phone and put it away." She watched his face run its calculations. The negotiation between denial and concession, the rapid assessment of how much to admit and in what form. "It is not what you—" he started. "Don't," she said. One word. It landed. "Do not say that to me tonight," she said. "I am 8 months pregnant in a hospital bed. My blood pressure dropped. I fell alone on a parking garage floor. A stranger held my hand while he waited for help. Not my husband. A stranger who did not know my name held my hand." She paused. "Do not stand there and tell me it is not what I think." The silence that followed was the kind that changes things permanently. He sat in the chair beside the bed. Not close. He did not reach for her hand. She did not extend it. He looked at the floor. "Her name is Brooke," he said. She had known a name was coming. She had braced herself for it. She had told herself she was ready for it. She was not ready for it. Her name is Brooke. 4 words. A name, a real specific person, with a name that her husband had just spoken in this room at midnight. Not a suspicion. Not a fear managed in a bathroom at 2 in the morning with the search history cleared. A name. "How long?" Claire said. 8 months. The math happened in her body before her mind could stop it. 8 months back was February. February was Santa Barbara. February was the 20-week ultrasound he missed. February was when she had started showing. He had been with Brooke the entire pregnancy. She did not throw anything. She did not raise her voice. She turned her face to the window and looked at the orange-gray glow of Los Angeles at midnight. And she breathed, and she let the full weight of this land on her, not in managed pieces. The whole of it at once. It was very heavy. She breathed through it. "I want you to leave," she said. "Claire, please." "I want you to leave this room," she said. "I do not want to speak about this tonight. If you do not leave, I will ask for assistance removing you, and I will not hesitate." She looked at him. "I need you to understand that I am saying this literally." He left. The curtain swung closed and settled. The monitor beeped. The baby shifted. That slow, deliberate movement of a person rearranging herself in a small space. Claire put both hands on her belly. She stayed like that. Ruth came back with vending machine coffees and crackers. She found Claire sitting up with both hands on her belly, eyes on the curtain where he had been standing. "He came," Ruth said. "He came." Ruth sat down. She set the coffees out. She opened the crackers and placed them within reach without mentioning eating, the way good nurses do. 8 months, Claire said. Ruth closed her eyes briefly. "The whole pregnancy," Claire said. Her voice was controlled in the way that requires real effort to maintain. "I read to her at night, every night. I sit up in bed with a flashlight because I do not want to wake him, and I read chapter books because I read that babies respond to the rhythm of language. I have been telling her about her father." Her voice cracked once, then steadied, telling her good things I believed. Ruth said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. "What do I tell her now?" Claire asked. Not performance. The genuine not knowing of someone whose wound had reached past the personal damage and into the future. Into the person, not yet born, who is going to need a story. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. "The truth?" Ruth said. "When she is old enough, the real truth. Her mother loved her before she had a name. Her mother got up off that floor. Her mother made a list." A pause. "Which you will have made by morning." "I haven't made it yet," Claire said. "You will," Ruth said. "I know how you work." Ruth fell asleep in the chair. The hospital went to its nighttime quiet. The monitor beeped its steady count. Claire lay awake and thought about what she had found in the medicine cabinet 2 weeks ago. She had been looking for cough syrup. She had found a prescription bottle instead. His name on the label. Anti-anxiety medication. 6 months old. She had looked at it for a long time and put it back and told herself there was a normal explanation and gone to bed. She thought about that now. He had been anxious. He had been medicated for 6 months. He had come to bed beside her every night, and he had never said a word. Not because he didn't trust her, because he had been managing her the way he managed everything, controlling the information, maintaining the version of the story she was allowed to have. She thought, he could have told me. I would have helped. I would have listened. I was his wife, and I would have been that for him. He chose not to let me. She breathed. I deserve to know the real things, she thought. Not the managed version, the actual truth of the person I was sleeping beside. She said it out loud into the quiet room. I deserved better than this. Not as complaint, as measurement, a calibration of what was true. She said it one more time, then she tried to sleep. In the morning, Ruth brought real coffee from the cafe down the block. Smuggled in a paper cup because hospital coffee was, in Ruth's considered professional opinion, an argument against the concept. Claire was sitting up, with her hair combed and her phone in her hand. You made a list, Ruth said. I always make lists. What is on it? Attorney, Claire said. OB follow-up. Call my mother. Understand the house situation. She paused. Call Diane Whitmore and tell her I know that she knew. Ruth sat down carefully. In that order? Yes. Ruth handed over the coffee and sat with her own. It is going to be okay, Ruth said. You cannot know that, Claire said. No, Ruth agreed. But I know you. That is basically the same thing. Dr. Phelps discharged her at 10 in the morning. Ruth drove. Claire sat in the passenger seat and watched Los Angeles through the window, the October light coming in low and specific. The mountains visible on the horizon, their edges sharp after a clear night. The city moving around her in its ordinary way, entirely indifferent to what had happened to her the evening before. She did not speak. Ruth did not require her to. They stopped at a light near the park she walked through 3 mornings a week. A woman was crossing in front of them. Stroller, coffee, earbuds, the complete absorption of someone entirely inside her own morning. She moved without hurry. She moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going and was at peace with the pace of getting there. Claire watched her until the light changed. She breathed. She was still here. The baby was still here. Today was still today. That had to be enough for right now. Just that. They kept her overnight for observation. Dr. Phelps wanted the monitoring to continue. She wanted the blood pressure numbers to hold. She said the word discharge at 10 the following morning and not before, and Claire did not argue. She lay in the bay through the long night and into the October morning, and when the light shifted from fluorescent to the particular diluted yellow of morning through a hospital window, the memories came. Not gently, the way flooding comes when a structure finally gives, all at once, from every direction, filling every low space. She remembered the night she told him. She had planned it the way she planned everything. With care, with detail, with attention to the experience she wanted to create. She had made his favorite dinner, the pasta with lemon and capers, and the technique she had learned from a cooking video, watched 6 times until she had it right. She had set the table with the good plates, the wedding gift ones used 4 times a year, for occasions that earned them. Candles, a wrapped onesie, and tissue paper that said Dad's new business partner in small blue letters. She remembered his face when he lifted it out of the box, the real smile, the one that reached his eyes, the one she had fallen in love with 3 years before they married, in a conference room where he had walked in late and apologized to the whole room with a grin that made the apology irrelevant. He had pulled her into his lap right there at the dinner table and said the words out loud, "We are having a baby," with a wonder in his voice that she had carried with her for 8 months like something precious. She remembered thinking, "This is the happiest night of my life." She turned that memory over now in the hospital bed. She looked at it from every angle with the unsentimental attention of someone trying to find the seam. She looked at it without the protective haze that love had always cast over it before. Was the wonder real? Was the smile real? Or was she looking at a performance by a man who was, in February, already moving toward the thing that would become Brooke? She did not know. That was the part that went deepest. She genuinely did not know whether he had loved her on that night, whether the smile was true or managed, whether any of what she had believed was the real thing or the version he needed her to have. This is what betrayal does differently from ordinary grief. Grief takes what is gone. Betrayal reaches backward. It does not stop at the wound. It moves through the past like a person moving through a house, leaving marks on everything it touches. It turns good memories into evidence. It makes a fool of every moment of trust. She pressed her palm against her belly. "You are real," she thought. The baby, her daughter, whatever was or was not real about the rest of it. This was real. That night happened, and this child was the proof of it, and that could not be reached. She remembered the baby shower. Ruth had organized it. 30 women in Diane Whitmore's house in Hancock Park, the neighborhood where the houses have names and the hedges are maintained by professionals and the flower arrangements are never accidental. The house smelled like fresh white lilies and the dry warmth of rooms that are always beautiful and never quite lived in. Nathaniel had come for 40 minutes. He had kissed her cheek in front of the room. He had remembered the names of her college friends. He had worked that living room with the particular skill of a man who understood attention as currency, making each person feel briefly, specifically noticed before moving to the next. And then his phone had rung, and he had stepped outside, and he had not come back. Diane Whitmore had been standing near the fireplace with sparkling water and perfect posture, and the expression of a woman who has spent 64 years perfecting the art of registering everything while showing nothing. She had watched her son leave. She had turned back to her conversation. She had known. The certainty settled in Claire's chest with the weight of a fact that had always been true. Diane had known, and she had said nothing. She had stood at her granddaughter's baby shower and watched her son leave and chosen silence, not from cruelty, from the long habitual practice of protecting the structure of the family above the welfare of the individuals inside it. Claire filed the knowledge. She placed it on the shelf with the other things she was going to deal with in order. The 3 a.m. searches. She had never told anyone about them. She had cleared the browser history every time. She had been in the bathroom with the water running and her phone and the door closed, and she had typed things into the search bar and read the results and chosen the interpretations that allowed her to go back to bed. Signs your husband is pulling away during pregnancy. Is emotional distance normal in the 3rd trimester? Why does my husband seem relieved when I fall asleep? How to know if your marriage is in serious trouble. She had read every article. She had closed every tab. She had cleared the history and climbed back into bed and lain very still beside him and told herself, "It is stress. It is the pressure of the business. It is what every marriage goes through when a baby is coming. It is not what you think it is. You are reading things that are not there." She had needed to believe that, so she had believed it. And every time she went back to bed and believed it, she thought she was protecting herself. She had not been protecting herself. She had been protecting him. This was the universal realization. She understood it now in the hospital bay at 3 in the morning. Not just about herself, about the whole human pattern of it. The way we choose the interpretation that costs less. The way we build elaborate structures of not knowing to avoid paying the full price of the truth all at once. It was not weakness, it was survival. And recognizing it as survival, giving herself the grace of that recognition, was the first small step towards something that was not grief. She remembered the last time they were actually happy, not performed happy, not competent and functioning and maintaining the appearance. February, Santa Barbara, a rented house on the water, 4 months pregnant, the baby not yet visible to strangers, the particular intimacy of a secret still partly theirs. Saturday morning, in the rental kitchen, with the ancient griddle and no idea what they were doing. The pancakes had been spectacular failures, burnt on the outside and raw in the center, and shaped like nothing recognizable. They had laughed about it. Real laughter, the kind that surprised both of them, the kind she had not realized she was missing until it arrived. She had photographed the ruined pancakes and sent them to Ruth with the caption, "Domestic Success." She still had that photograph. She looked at it now. The blackened edges, the cheerful striped dish towel in the background, the rental kitchen with its cheerful incompetence. She wondered if he had been texting Brooke that weekend. She wondered what he told Brooke when Brooke asked where he was. She wondered, and this was the one that drew real blood, whether he had felt guilty that weekend, lying in that house, listening to the ocean, with his pregnant wife asleep beside him. Did he feel the weight of the thing he was doing? Did he feel it and do it anyway? Did both things live in him simultaneously? The real feeling for her and the real feeling for Brooke. And if they did, which was worse, that he loved her and did this, or that he didn't. She put the phone down. She put her hands on her belly. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, I have got you." She did not know if she was reassuring her daughter or herself. Probably both. Ruth brought real coffee at 8:30. Claire was sitting up. She had combed her hair. She had her list. Ruth looked at the phone. "You made a list." "I always make lists when everything else is out of my control." "What is on it?" "Attorney," Claire said. "OB follow-up. Call my mother. Figure out the house. Tell Diane Whitmore I know she knew." She looked up. In that order. Ruth sat down and handed over the coffee. "It is going to be okay," Ruth said. "You cannot know that." "No," Ruth said. "But I know you, and you are going to make it okay," which is basically the same thing. He was already there when she arrived home. She had not prepared herself for the specific physical fact of it. Her key in the lock, the door opening, and there he was in her kitchen with the granite island they had chosen together on a Saturday afternoon in Culver City, she 9 weeks pregnant and unreasonably happy about countertops, thinking, "We are building something. Look at everything we are building." He had made coffee. White lilies on the counter, still in the grocery store plastic, the price sticker visible on the outside of the wrap. She noted the price sticker. She noted the haste in which they had been purchased. A gesture assembled from guilt on the way home, stopping at the all-night grocery, reaching for her favorite flower, because that was the kind of information he had. He knew her favorite flower, and he had used that knowledge to construct an apology on a counter. She set her hospital bag down at the door. "I didn't know you were being discharged," he said. "Ruth brought me. I would have come. I didn't want you to come." He turned from the counter to face her. Yesterday's clothes, no sleep, the genuine suffering in him was real. She could read it. She had always been able to read him, and the suffering was real. She registered it. She gave it the small acknowledgement it deserved. But beneath the acknowledgement, and much larger than it, was something else. Cold, specific. The kind of anger that does not need to raise its voice because it is entirely certain of itself. I want to ask you something, she said. I want a straight answer. Okay, he said. Does she know about me? Does she know about the pregnancy? A pause, long enough to answer before he spoke. Yes, he said. So she made her choices with complete information, Claire said. She knew about the cheating husband. She knew there was a pregnant wife at home. She continued anyway. Claire, I am not asking for an explanation, she said. I am asking you to confirm facts. I am completely done with softened versions of things. She moved to the kitchen table and pulled out her chair. Her chair, the one with the slightly better view of the garden, claimed without discussion, in the first month they lived here. She sat down carefully. Sit down. He sat across from her, the granite island between them, the lilies in their plastic. I fell in love with her, he said, quiet. I know that is not... Do not apologize to me for loving her, Claire said. Apologize for lying to my face for 8 months. Apologize for letting me make plans for a life with you while you were building a separate one. Apologize for missing the 20-week ultrasound, the appointment where I found out we were having a daughter, when I called you 6 times because I wanted you to be the first person I told, because you were with her. She paused. That is what requires an apology, not the feeling. He was quiet. Do you want to marry her? Claire asked. He could not answer, or would not. The silence answered for him, and they both heard it. Okay, she said. She stood up. She was steady. She noticed this with a kind of removed observation, the way you notice something from a distance. I need you to stay somewhere else. Ruth will be here, or my mother. I will not be alone. She moved toward the hallway. My attorney will contact yours by the end of next week. Claire, please. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen. She turned back one more time. You chose her, she said. Not once. Not in a moment of weakness or confusion or bad judgment. Every single day for 8 months. You looked at me, at all of this. She touched her belly once, briefly. You saw all of this and you chose differently anyway. She paused. I am saying this once, out loud, so we both hear it, without any softening, and then I am done saying it. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands in her lap. The front door closed. She cried for 11 minutes. She counted without trying to. She had always counted things. It was how she was built. She tracked and measured and quantified because numbers made the uncontrollable feel less so. 11 minutes. Then she stopped and washed her face and called her mother in Phoenix. Margaret arrived the next morning. 61 years old. Practical shoes, 2 carry-on bags, and a casserole wrapped in 3 layers of aluminum foil that had traveled through 2 airports because she believed food was the physical form of love, and she was not arriving without it. She came through the door and she opened her arms. Claire stood in them for a long time. She pressed her face against her mother's shoulder, the way she had at 9 years old, after the worst day of 4th grade. Some things did not change. Some things should not. Tell me everything, Margaret said. They sat at the kitchen table. Claire told her all of it. Margaret listened without speaking. A skill, a discipline, the sustained restraint of a woman who had learned that the whole story needed to be heard before anyone could help. When Claire finished, Margaret put her hand over her daughter's hand. You know what keeps going through my mind, Claire said. Tell me, Margaret said. I deserved better than this. She said it the way she had said it in the closet. Not as complaint, not as self-pity, but as recalibration. The quiet correction of a measurement that had been wrong for too long. Not just from him, from myself. I spent 6 years adjusting myself to fit the space he had available, making myself smaller. I did it so gradually I did not notice I was doing it. Margaret was very still. "I have not failed," Claire said. "I know what it looks like, but I have not failed. I just finally stopped doing something that was making me disappear." She looked at her mother. "The two things look identical from outside. They are not the same thing at all." Margaret's hand tightened. "Yes," she said. One word, the correct word, nothing extra. The cleaning began that night at 11. Margaret was asleep. The house was quiet. Claire was too alert for sleep and too exhausted for complex thought. And in that specific condition, she did what she had always done since her first apartment in her first adult life. She cleaned. The thorough kind, not the surface kind. She stripped the bed, everything into the washing machine. While it ran, she went to the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet and took everything out. She found the prescription bottle behind his shaving kit. His name on the label, anti-anxiety medication, 6 months old. She held it in the 2 a.m. quiet, and she thought, he was suffering. For 6 months, he was taking this and coming to bed beside me, and I did not know. Not because I was unobservant, because he managed it away from me with the same skill he managed everything else. Controlled information, selective disclosure. He could have told me. I would have helped. He chose not to let me. She put the bottle back exactly where she found it. She kept cleaning until 2:30 in the morning. She sat on the closet floor, sorting a donation pile, and she said it out loud to the quiet house. Starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. I know that now. I could not have kept going the way I was going. I could not have kept getting smaller and calling it love. The house held the sentence. She said it again. Then she went to bed. Margaret did not know about the call. It was 6:15 in the morning. Margaret was asleep. The baby was quiet. Claire made chamomile tea. Her mother had bought it. It was what there was. And sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug and the flat, early morning light coming through the kitchen window, and she dialed. Diane answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. 1 ring seemed eager. 3 rings seemed absent. 2 was controlled. Claire had observed this pattern over 6 years of phone calls and had never remarked on it until now, when she noticed it and filed it in the category of things Diane did deliberately. "Claire," Diane said, "how are you feeling?" "I have been better," Claire said. "I know that you knew, Diane." A silence. Not the flinching silence of someone caught. The deliberate, measuring silence of someone deciding how much to confirm and in what form. "I suspected," Diane said. "I think you and Ruth used that word differently," Claire said. "Ruth suspected. You knew. You have known Nathaniel for 38 years. You know what his absences mean. You know what a phone call during a baby shower means." She paused. "You watched him leave that afternoon. You saw his face, and you turned back to your conversation." A longer silence. "Yes," Diane said, quietly. "I knew." Claire closed her eyes. She had been certain she was right. Being right did not make it lighter. "I believed he would end it," Diane said. The formality in her voice had shifted. Still present, but adjusted. The way a rigid structure under sustained pressure begins to yield without breaking. "When you told us about the pregnancy, I thought he would make the right choice. I told myself I would give him the opportunity. I hoped he would take it before you had to know." "That was not your decision," Claire said. "You made a choice about my life and my daughter's life without my knowledge. You decided what I was allowed to know about my own marriage. Yes, Diane said. I did. I want to ask you something, Claire said. All right. At the baby shower, when you watched him leave, what did you feel? The longest silence yet. Ashamed, Diane said. Claire had prepared for defensiveness. She had braced for the armor of maternal loyalty that Diane Whitmore had always maintained, composed, impenetrable, the practiced fortress of a woman who had spent a lifetime protecting the image of her family. Shame was not what she had prepared for. It was genuine. It shifted the shape of the conversation. I am not calling to use this against him, Claire said. That is not what this is. I am calling because I needed to say directly to you. I deserve to know. My daughter deserved a mother who made her choices with complete information. Whatever you thought you were protecting, I deserved the truth. Yes, Diane said. You did. I was wrong. I am sorry. 3 sentences. No qualification. No self-defense. It was the most Diane Whitmore had given her in 6 years. What do you need? Diane asked. This question. In 6 years, she had never been asked this by this woman. She had been given things. She had not been asked. Nothing right now, Claire said. I just needed you to hear me. I heard you, Diane said. Claire ended the call. She sat with the chamomile tea and the early morning and the bare-stemmed roses in the garden, and she breathed. A door opened where there had been a wall. Small, uncertain, but real. That afternoon, she went to a bookstore. She did not announce this. She got her coat and her keys and told her mother she needed an hour, and she went. The bookstore was on the west side. The large one, with the good children's section and the cafe in the back that smelled like coffee and paper and the particular warm dust of many books close together, which was one of the best smells she knew. She moved slowly through the children's section. She picked up books and put them down, the familiar ones she already had, new ones that did not reach her. On the bottom shelf, she found one she had not seen before, a picture book, a mother fox and her daughter walking through winter, watercolor illustrations in blues and grays, bare trees, deep snow, the cold particular beauty of a woods in December. The mother fox lost the path twice. Both times her daughter saw something the mother missed, a familiar smell on the cold air, a glimmer between the trees. And together, they found their way. Claire bought it without reading the back. She sat in the cafe with a decaf and read all 14 pages. She sat with the closed book for a long time. Outside the cafe window, the October afternoon was doing the thing it sometimes did. The light from just the right angle, making the ordinary things briefly unreasonable. A parking meter, the dry cleaner's awning, a woman walking a small dog, both of them moving at exactly the same unhurried pace. I am going to be okay, Claire thought, not as reassurance, not as something she needed to talk herself into, as an observation, calm and specific. I am going to be okay, and so is she, and we are going to find the path. She finished her coffee and went home. She sat in the parking structure for 12 minutes. Engine off, both hands on the steering wheel. The parking ticket on the dashboard, the clock on the radio reading 10:48 in the morning. This was the shared experience, the moment that did not belong only to her. Every woman who had ever sat in a car outside the hard appointment, the attorney, the doctor, the conversation that could not be undone once it began, knew this parking lot, knew these 12 minutes, knew the feeling of being completely certain and completely unable to move forward simultaneously. She was not having second thoughts. She was absolutely clear on that. Every part of her was moving toward this appointment. But going in meant official. It meant her marriage in a folder with her name on the tab. It meant the practical mechanics of dismantling a life she had built and a self she had slowly surrendered inside it. She took out her phone. Lock, unlock, lock. She called Ruth. "I'm in the parking structure," she said, "of the attorney's office." "Yes?" "How long?" "12 minutes." A pause. "What do you need?" "Just talk for a minute." Ruth talked. About a delivery earlier that week, a difficult labor that had ended beautifully, a first-time mother who kept saying, "I cannot believe I did that. I actually did that," over and over while she held her daughter. About the vending machine on the third floor that had been consuming dollar bills for a month with complete impunity. About a patient who had asked whether the name Herbert was making a comeback. "Is it?" Claire asked. "I told her it was distinctive and she should trust her instincts," Ruth said. Something in Claire's chest loosened. "Okay," she said. "Go in," Ruth said. She went in. Martin Gallagher's office had been designed by someone who had thought carefully about what environments feel stable. Warm wood, living plants, several of them genuinely thriving, which communicated either dedication or excellent selection, probably both. A window with a view of a small private garden below. California native plants along a brick path, something purple blooming even in November. Martin Gallagher was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the particular quality of stillness that develops in people who spend 30 years in rooms with people in crisis. He had learned when to speak and when to simply be present and unhurried, and he understood that the difference between those two things was everything. "Tell me everything," he said. She told him, all of it in order, with the precision of someone who had been organizing the account in her mind for weeks. The parking garage, the hospital, the kitchen table, the timeline. He took notes. When she finished, he looked up. "You are in a strong position," he said. "California community property. 6-year marriage. No prenuptial agreement. Significant income disparity and a child on the way." He paused. His annual income. She told him the number. He nodded once, the nod of a man whose calculation has confirmed what he expected. "The child's welfare is the court's primary concern," he said, "but your financial security is well protected. I want you focused on your health and your pregnancy. Let me handle the mechanics." He set his pen down. "Before we go further, what matters most to you in this process?" She thought about it.
They are at the
"My daughter," she said. "Whatever the final arrangements look like, I want her life to be stable. I do not want her childhood to be a conflict zone. I do not want this to be punitive." She paused. "And I want to be honest throughout. I am done with the kind of management and selective truth that got us here. I want a fair outcome through honest means." Martin looked at her for a moment. "Those are achievable," he said. "All of them." She believed him, not naively. She had done her research, asked the right questions, checked the right references. She believed him practically, the way you believe someone who has given you no reason not to. She shook his hand when the hour was finished and walked out into the Century City afternoon. She drove home the long way, past the pharmacy, where she had bought 4 pregnancy tests in February because she kept thinking she had misread the first one, past the coffee shop, where she had called her mother from a back table with her laptop open and said the words wrong. "Mom, you are going to be a grandmother," before correcting herself, and they had both cried the good kind. Past the park with the oak trees, past the fountain path she had walked through the entire 8th month, talking to the baby about the dog she saw and the things Ruth texted her and the way the trees looked in October. She thought about the list she had been making without knowing it, the list of all the space she had given away, all the room she had stopped taking up, all the adjustments so small and so gradual she had not registered them as a pattern until she looked back and saw the whole shape. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible in my own life. I was not invisible to everyone, but I became invisible to myself. I became something that existed in relation to him. I thought that was love. I thought making myself smaller was a form of generosity. It was not generosity. It was disappearance. A red light. A jogger crossed in front of her. A woman her age, headphones in, moving at a steady pace. The particular self-possession of someone in motion for her own reasons, going somewhere on her own terms. I want that back, she thought. I had it once. I want it back. The light changed. She drove. She called her former boss 2 days later, not to ask for anything, to say, I am still here. I am still the person you knew. Her boss picked up on the third ring. Claire Whitmore. I heard maternity leave. I am hoping that means what I think. 8 months, Claire said. A girl, about 3 weeks out. And everything else. A pause. I heard a little. It is being handled, Claire said. When you are ready to think about work, you call me. Consulting, your schedule, your terms, I mean every word of that. I know you do, Claire said. She hung up and added it to the list. Not a task, a door being held open for when she was ready to walk through it. The baby came 3 weeks early. Claire woke at 3 in the morning on a Thursday in November with contractions 11 minutes apart. She lay still and timed them the way she timed everything, precisely, with the phone clock, noting each start and end, the way she had been tracking her life for months, measuring what she could not control. At 8 minutes apart, she woke her mother. Margaret was in the doorway in under a minute. She had been sleeping in her clothes. She had not told Claire she was doing this, and would not have confirmed it if asked, but there she was, dressed, ready. Okay, Margaret said. She looked at Claire's face. Let's go. Ruth met them at the hospital. She had been home, off shift, asleep. Claire had called and said 3 words. It is starting. Ruth had said leaving now, and that was the conversation. 22 hours of labor. There is nothing that captures what 22 hours of labor is. It consumed everything. Every cell of attention, every reserve. There was no room for anything else. Not for the anger she had been learning to inhabit. Not for the legal proceedings. Not for the image of a man in a parking garage putting a phone away. Just this. The total present tense demand of the thing her body was doing. Ruth was there from the beginning. Margaret was there. Dr. Phelps arrived at hour 3 and stayed through the long middle of it. Nathaniel arrived at hour 14. A nurse leaned in between contractions and said quietly that he was in the waiting room. Claire was in the specific, small, suspended mercy between contractions, the pause where every second without pain is a gift. And she heard the sentence, and she said, "Tell him I will contact him when there is news." Not with anger, not with performance, with the calm directness of someone who is busy with something more important. The nurse nodded and went. At hour 21, in one of the pauses, a single thought arrived. Involuntary. Clear. Completely certain of itself. This is the bravest thing I've ever done. Not just the labor, though that too. The whole of the past months. The parking garage and the attorney's office and the kitchen table and the 3 a.m. searches she had finally stopped clearing. She had done all of it. She was still here. She was still entirely herself. I did this without him, she thought. Every part of it. And I am still completely here. Adelaide Margaret Whitmore, was born at 2:17 in the afternoon. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Care? A full head of it. Claire's nose exactly. The particular slight upturn that she had always considered unremarkable and found herself grateful for now, seeing it on this new face. Ruth placed her on Claire's chest, and Claire, who had been controlled and deliberate and precise for 3 weeks, who had timed her contractions and made her lists and practiced her sentences, came entirely undone. Not from grief, not from pain, from love. The specific, total, immediate kind, the kind that does not arrive gradually or ask permission. It simply was, all at once, without any possible alternative. "Hi," Claire said. Her voice was wrecked in the best way. "Hi, I have been reading to you for months." Adelaide opened her eyes, unfocused, the particular baffled expression of a person who has arrived somewhere extremely bright and is processing an enormous amount of new information simultaneously. She was the most real thing Claire had ever held. "I have got you," Claire said. "I promise you, I have completely got you." It was 2 in the morning when the dark thoughts came. Margaret had gone home to sleep. Ruth had gone to her family. The room was quiet. Adelaide was in the bassinet beside the bed, making the small sounds of a new person encountering the world. Sighs, near sneezes, the mysterious mouth movements of someone whose brain was cataloging everything at once. Claire lay in the hospital dark and let the thoughts come. She thought about what the next year would look like. 2 homes, holidays divided by attorneys and calendars, school events where she and Nathaniel would sit at careful distances and perform the cooperative parenting of people who had decided their daughter's well-being was worth the performance. She thought, starting over feels impossible. And then, but staying would have been worse. I could not have kept going the way I was going. I could not have kept getting smaller and calling it love. And then the one she had not expected. Under the grief and the anger and the practical management of a life in pieces, there was relief. Not relief that the marriage had ended. Relief that the pretending had stopped. Relief that she could stop working so hard to not know what she had known. She looked at Adelaide in the bassinet, her daughter's chest rising and falling. "I'm going to tell you the truth," Claire said softly. "About all of it. When you are old enough, not the softened version, the real one." She paused. "Your father and I could not make it work. That is true, and it is not your weight to carry. That is mine, and I am going to carry it so that you do not have to." Adelaide sighed, small, complete. Claire closed her eyes. Brooke Kavanaugh came to the house 12 days after Adelaide was born. Claire answered the door in a robe with her daughter, against her shoulder. The full body lean that new mothers develop, the upper body adjusted entirely to the weight and warmth of a sleeping infant, and found this woman on her doorstep. She was holding a potted succulent, small terracotta pot, a hand-painted stripe around the rim. The plant itself, squat, geometric, entirely sure of itself, looked considerably more certain of its place in the world than the woman holding it. Claire looked at the plant. She looked at Brooke. The situation was so specific and so absurd that she almost laughed. "I am not here to cause trouble," Brooke said. Her voice was careful and slightly too fast. She was pale. Her eyes were red at the edges. She held the plant in both hands like something she needed between herself and everything else. "I just need to tell you something. He does not know I am here." Claire stood in the doorway and looked at this woman who had occupied such enormous space in her imagination for weeks. She could close the door. She had every right to close the door. "Come in," she said. "You are holding the baby while I make tea." Brooke sat on the edge of the couch and held Adelaide with the careful stiffness of someone who had never held a newborn before and was acutely aware of the stakes. She held her the right way, head supported, the correct angle, either by instinct or by something she had looked up on the way over. Claire made tea in the kitchen and came back and sat across from her. "Tell me," she said. Brooke told her. She had not known about Claire for the first 3 months. She had been told the marriage was over, separated, a legal formality waiting on timing. She had believed this because she had wanted to believe it, and because he was persuasive, and because she had not asked the questions that would have found the truth. A choice she had made. She was not going to pretend otherwise. When she found out, not from Nathaniel, from a comment at a work event, the careless way information moves when someone assumes everyone already knows. She had ended it. 3 times. Each time he had called back. Not yet, not the right moment. The pregnancy complicated the logistics. He had real feelings for her and needed her to be patient. She had been patient. "I am not saying this to excuse what I did," Brooke said. She was looking at Adelaide. Something had changed in her face since she had been holding her. A softening, or a recognition, or perhaps both. "There is no excuse. I should have left the moment I found out. That is simply the truth." She looked up. "But I needed you to know that he lied to both of us. He told me a story that was not true, and I chose to believe it. That is on me. But the story was his." She paused. "I will tell your attorney everything I know. I am done with him. Completely. I needed you to know that." "Oh, bum, bum." Adelaide made a small sound. Brooke looked down at her. "She looks like you," Brooke said. "Yes," Claire said. "She does." They sat in the November afternoon light of the living room, the tea cooling on the coffee table. 2 women on opposite sides of a construction that one man had built around them both. Neither of them aware of the other's full existence until the construction collapsed. "You should go," Claire said. Not harshly. Plainly. Brooke nodded. She handed Adelaide back with that same careful attention, stood, and moved to the door. "I am sorry," she said. "I know," Claire said. She watched Brooke walk to her car. Then she went inside and sat with her daughter in the quiet of the living room and let the thought settle. He lied to both of us. She had not needed Brooke to tell her this. But hearing it said directly, in her own living room, in the afternoon light, completed something. Not her failure, not her inadequacy, not something she had missed or should have seen. A man who told different versions of the truth to different people and managed the construction until it fell. I was not the problem. I was the person standing in the room when what he built came down. Ruth called that evening. "How was your day?" Ruth said, in the tone she used when she already knew the answer was complicated. "Brooke came to the house," Claire said. A pause. "Carrying what?" "A succulent." A longer pause. "I need the full sentence." Claire gave her the full sentence, the whole story. Ruth was quiet when she finished. "Okay," Ruth said. "I have been sitting on something for approximately 4 years, and it is coming out now." "Say it," Claire said. "I never liked him." And Claire laughed. Real laughter. The genuine kind. From the chest without permission. The kind she had not made in weeks. Full body, unguarded, the feeling of a window. Opened in a room sealed too long. "You never—" "Not once," Ruth said. "Not in 4 years. He had this thing at parties. When he was talking to you, he was doing this invisible scan of the room, a fraction. Most people would never see it. I always saw it. Like he was taking an inventory of who else was present and whether they outranked the conversation he was in." Ruth paused. "I held it because you loved him, but I am saying it now. I never liked him, and I have watched you in the past several weeks become more yourself than you have been in a very long time." Claire sat with that. Was I very different? She asked. You were quieter than you are, Ruth said. Not shy. Quieter in the way of someone who has learned to take up less space. You are getting louder again, in the good way. Late one night, Adelaide asleep, and the house completely quiet, Claire reorganized her closet. Not the crisis version, the deliberate one. She took everything out and put it on the bed and looked at all of it in the lamplight. Some of it was right. The green dress, worn soft from years. The good boots, the college sweatshirt her mother had attempted to donate twice. And some of it was wrong. The specific wrongness of clothes chosen for a performance she no longer needed to give. The wife of Nathaniel Whitmore, the appropriate wardrobe for the appropriate life. She made a pile. The pile was large. What remained was smaller and specific, and entirely, recognizably hers. She looked at it for a long time. Starting over is not becoming someone new, she thought. It is remembering who you were before you started adjusting yourself around someone else's version of you. I did not lose myself. I covered her up for a while. She is still here. She turned off the light and went to bed. Patrick Whitmore emailed in December. 6 weeks after the divorce proceedings had formally begun. 6 weeks after a long meeting in Martin Gallagher's office, during which Claire had signed 4 documents and understood, for the first time, the specific legal anatomy of a marriage in dissolution. She was at the kitchen table with Adelaide and the bouncer when the notification appeared. Adelaide was 8 weeks old and had recently discovered that she had hands, which she found astonishing, and was spending considerable time examining. Claire read the email after Adelaide was asleep. Claire, I know you have no reason to respond to this. I want to tell you that I am sorry for what my brother did, and I am sorry that I was not present in a way that might have made any difference. I have watched this family do things I found easier to walk away from than to confront directly. I am trying to learn a different way. I hope you and your daughter are well. She read it 3 times. She did not respond for 2 weeks. She thought about it during the 2 a.m. feeding, in the specific still world of those nighttime hours when the rest of the city was sleeping and it was just her and Adelaide and the low lamp and the sound of her daughter eating. She thought about what Patrick was extending, what he wanted, whether she had the capacity for it. She wrote back on a Tuesday, "Thank you for writing. Adelaide is doing beautifully. She has strong opinions about bottle temperature and has recently discovered that her hands exist, which she finds extraordinary." He replied within an hour, "The hand discovery is genuinely one of the better things to witness. The ceiling fan phase comes next. Brace yourself." She had not known he had children. She wrote back. They began to correspond, carefully, with the attention of people navigating territory adjacent to something painful, testing the ground before each step. She met him in January. Ruth had suggested the cafe, a place in a neighborhood that belonged to neither of them, chosen for its neutrality and its good coffee, and its tables set far enough apart for a private conversation. Patrick Whitmore was tall like his brother. Beyond that, the resemblance decreased quickly. He had the look of someone who had spent years operating with sharpness and had since chosen to put it down. Not weakness. The deliberate softness that costs something and is chosen anyway. He stood when she came in. He did not try to hug her. He understood correctly that this meeting was not there yet. They ordered coffee and settled into conversation gradually, the way careful people do. He told her things about the Whitmore family. He was direct about the framing. Not a defense. He said it plainly at the start. Context, because she deserved complete information. She recognized the phrase and noted it. Their father had been a man who believed provision was love, that money and success and status were the forms love was supposed to take. That the interior life, feelings, need, the admission of vulnerability, was weakness. Weakness was failure. Whitmore men did not fail. 2 sons had grown up in that house. Patrick had pushed back. He had named the thing, confronted it, paid for the confrontation financially and personally, and was still paying. He was the estranged one, the difficult one, the one who left. Nathaniel had absorbed the lesson instead, had become exceptional at performance, at managing perception, at giving people the version of himself they needed to see while keeping the interior completely private. Not from strength, but from the deep, trained conviction that the interior was not safe to show. He does not know how to be known, Patrick said. He held his coffee in both hands. That sounds like an excuse, and I am not offering it as one. I am offering it as an explanation of why he will do to Brooke what he did to you, eventually. Not from malice, because he does not know another way to be in a relationship. He performs the version he thinks you need, and he maintains it until he cannot. I know, Claire said. You deserved someone who knew how to actually show up, Patrick said, who knew how to let you see him. She looked at him across the table. Yes, she said, I did. She walked to her car in the January afternoon, clear and cool, the sky a precise, washed blue after a week of rain. The sidewalk still faintly damp, a smell of wet earth rising from the planted borders along the street. Adelaide was with Margaret. Claire had 2 hours of just herself. She walked slowly. She thought about what Patrick had said. Someone who knew how to be known. She thought about the version of love she had been practicing for 6 years. The version that required constant adjustment, constant management of someone else's comfort level with intimacy and honesty and need. She had become very good at loving someone in the specific way he needed to be loved. She had not been well loved in return. Not in the way that mattered. The seen and known kind. The kind where someone looks at you directly and does not look away. I know that now, she thought. I could not have said it a year ago. I would not have let myself say it, but I know it now. The wisdom moment arrived quietly, the way wisdom actually arrives. Not announced, not in a therapeutic setting, but walking to your car on a January afternoon, thinking about what someone just said. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time. I had the key. I just could not see it for a long time. I was working so hard to not see it that I convinced myself it was not there. She said it out loud, quietly, to the January street. I had the key. The street held the sentence without comment. The light at the corner changed. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a moment, not by the same, not frozen, not paralyzed, just sitting, in the way of someone who has become comfortable with her own company again. Okay, she said. What comes next? She drove to pick up her daughter. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in May. She had read every document the night before. Adelaide asleep in the next room, the monitor on the coffee table, a yellow highlighter moving through each clause and provision with the precision of the marketing director she had been before she had decided to disappear into someone else's life. Martin Gallagher's office at 9 in the morning. The California native plants in the garden below the window were flowering, something small and purple, covering the ground in a low, bright carpet. She signed where directed. Martin slid the last page across the desk. She picked up the pen. She paused. 6 years. A person she had loved, a life built, and a self slowly surrendered, and now, slowly, being recovered. All of it resolved into this last signature on this Tuesday morning in May. She signed. It is done, Martin said. It is done, Claire said. She shook his hand and thanked him sincerely and walked out into the May morning. She sat in the car. Lock, unlock. She sat there for 2 minutes, just sitting, not in paralysis, not in grief, with the realness of it. She texted her mother. It is done. 3 dots. Then, dinner tonight. I am making the chicken. She smiled. She drove home. Adelaide turned 1 in September. Small party. The guest list simple now, in the way lives become simple when you stop performing for people who were never really there for you. Margaret. Ruth and her husband, Derek, and their children. Clara, 7, who had appointed herself Adelaide's official tutor since birth and took this role completely seriously, and Sam, 4, whose primary relationship with the event was the cake. Claire's college roommate, Denise, who had driven down from San Francisco and brought a gift that Adelaide found satisfying to examine with both hands and her mouth. And Diane Whitmore. Claire had thought about this for all of August. She had thought about the early morning phone call and the word ashamed and the question, what do you need? She had thought about what Adelaide deserved, which was a grandmother who tried. Diane was trying, late, imperfectly, but actually trying, which was more than Claire had expected a year ago. She had said yes. Diane arrived in a camel coat over a simple dress. For Diane Whitmore, a significant gesture toward casual. She brought a stuffed bear of obvious quality, the kind of softness that communicated real investment. Adelaide was on Claire's hip when Diane arrived. She looked at this new person the way she looked at all new persons, with complete, unguarded interest. She reached toward Diane with both arms in the unmistakable gesture that meant, I would like to examine you more closely. Diane took her, held her with the practiced competence of a woman who had done this before, decades ago. Adelaide grabbed her pearl necklace immediately and pulled. Absolutely not, Diane said, but her voice, something had changed in it. The armor was still present. It would probably always be present. It was too much a part of her structure to be dismantled in a year. But underneath it, something had shifted. Something was there that had not been there in 6 years of Sunday dinners and holidays and a baby shower where this woman had watched her son leave and said nothing. Something that looked from a certain angle like a grandmother actually meeting her granddaughter. Claire watched from across the room. She was not going to fully trust Diane. Not for a long time, perhaps not completely ever, but Adelaide deserved a grandmother who showed up, and Diane was showing up, and that was something worth allowing. The room was full of people who had chosen to stay. That was the thing Claire kept returning to as she moved through the afternoon with her daughter, on her hip and cake on both their shirts and the September light coming through the windows in long, warm rectangles. Everyone in this room had chosen to be here, not because of the house or the money or the social proximity to Nathaniel Whitmore's orbit, because of her, because of Adelaide, because they had come when she called and stayed when she needed it, and that was the whole of what mattered. Later, after the cake and the singing, and after Diane had gone, and Ruth's children had reached the outer limit of their energy, and Derek had taken them home, and Ruth was washing dishes in the kitchen, and Margaret was deadheading the roses in the garden, Claire sat on the kitchen floor with her daughter. Just that. Adelaide had been pulling herself up on the kitchen cabinet for 3 weeks with the urgent determination of someone who found the pace of crawling personally insulting. She stood holding the cabinet door and rocked slightly and grinned at her own achievement. The birthday balloon, yellow, Claire's choice, because Adelaide tracked yellow objects with focused intensity, drifted along the ceiling in the slow current from the open window. Adelaide looked up at it. She pointed, one small decisive finger, absolutely certain of its direction. Balloon, Claire said. Bah, Adelaide said, with total confidence. So close, Claire said. You basically have it. Adelaide turned to look at her mother. The grin, enormous and specific. 2 bottom teeth, one slightly crooked, the face of a person who is entirely at peace with the world and her place in it. The grin of someone who has not yet been told there are things to be afraid of and is using the time well. Claire's chest did the thing it always did now, the thing without adequate language, the thing that was both enormous and uncomplicated, the thing that had no requirement except to be felt. Margaret took the photograph from the doorway, on her phone, without announcing it, in the afternoon light from the kitchen doorway, Claire and Adelaide on the floor, the yellow balloon overhead, Adelaide reaching upward with her fingers spread, reaching for something just beyond her reach. Claire looking at her daughter, not performing, not managing, not maintaining anything for anyone, just her face, looking at her daughter. Margaret texted it to her that evening after everyone had gone home and the house had settled into its quiet. Claire looked at it for a long time. She saved it in a folder she made on the spot. She named it Keep. She looked at the photograph one more time before she put the phone down. She did not add a caption. She did not share it anywhere. She did not need to. She needed only to see it. Proof. Specific, undeniable proof of what remained after the worst year of her life. Her daughter's face. The yellow balloon. The kitchen she had reorganized. The closet with only things she had actually chosen. The list made in a hospital bay when the rest of her life was coming apart. The attorney with living plants who had said, "You are in a strong position," before he had all the information, and had been right. The friend who ran from her unit to the emergency bay. The mother who slept in her clothes. The stranger in the parking garage who had held her hand and stayed until help came. Everything I thought I was losing, she thought. I either never truly had it, or I never truly needed it. Everything I thought I could not survive. I survived every part of it. And she is here, and I am here, and tomorrow I will make coffee, and she will try to eat the newspaper, and that is the actual thing. That is more than enough. That is everything I need it to be. A year and a half after the night in the parking garage, Claire was at Ruth's kitchen table. November again. The same particular quality of Los Angeles November. The air cool and clear, the trees making their gentle effort at autumn, the light going early now. Adelaide was asleep in the next room. She had, after a process involving research and a pediatric sleep specialist and the kind of parental determination that develops from 11 months of 2 a.m. wakefulness, finally started sleeping through the night. Everyone who knew Claire considered this a victory of equal significance to the legal outcomes. Ruth had actually said so, in those words. Ruth was making tea. Claire had her laptop open. The consulting offer from her former boss, part-time, flexible, her own terms, had been sitting in her inbox for 2 weeks while she read it a total of 6 times, which meant she had already decided and was simply completing the process of being sure. "How does it feel?" Ruth asked. She set the tea down and sat across from her. Which part? All of it. Claire thought about how to answer. Not quickly. This question deserved real consideration. "Like I am in a room I chose," she said. "That is the best way I can put it. The room is new, and there is still a lot to figure out. But I picked it, I unlocked the door and walked in, and it is mine." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "For a long time, I thought I needed someone else to show me which door to use. I thought I needed permission, or direction, or I do not know exactly. A map of some kind." She paused. "I had the map. I had always had it. I just was not reading it." Ruth looked at her. "What changed?" "I stopped waiting for someone else to open the door," Claire said. Ruth smiled. "Someone told me once," Claire said, "that the prison door had been unlocked all along, that I had been my own warden." She looked at the tea. "I did not understand it when I heard it. I was not in a place where I could understand it. But I kept coming back to it, in the hospital room, in the parking structure, in the closet at 2 in the morning. She shook her head slowly. And then one afternoon in January, walking to my car, I finally understood it. Not as a metaphor, as a literal, accurate description of something that had been true about my life. Who told you that? Ruth asked. My therapist said something close to it, Claire said. Or I read it somewhere. Or maybe I knew it, and it took me a long time to find the sentence for it. A pause. Maybe it does not matter where it came from. It is mine now. Ruth picked up her mug. Adelaide made a sound from the next room. Not distress. The specific sound of a sleeping person shifting, relocating, settling back into the particular depth of toddler sleep. Both women went still, listening. The sound subsided. Claire looked at the monitor on the table, the steady green light. She looked at her laptop. The job offer. The beginning of a chapter she had not written yet, and was beginning to actually look forward to writing. I am going to take the job, she said. I know so, Ruth said. You should have knew before I did. I almost always do. It is both a gift and a weight. Claire laughed. Ruth laughed. Outside, the November night was clear, the city going on in its ordinary way, the lights, the distant traffic, the sound of music from someone's gathering down the block, people in rooms they had chosen, or were choosing, or were learning they could choose. Claire looked at the folder on her phone named Keep. She thought about the parking garage, the cold cement floor, the lemongrass smell of the spilled takeout, the stranger's hand holding hers. She thought about the list she had made in a hospital bay, with Ruth asleep in the chair. The attorney's office parking structure, the 12 minutes with her hands on the steering wheel. The Tuesday in May, when she had signed her name and walked out into the morning. She had done all of it. She was still herself. She was more herself than she had been in 6 years. She was not the woman in the parking garage anymore. She was the woman who had gotten up, who had made the list, who had gone into the attorney's office after 12 minutes in the parking structure because Ruth had said, go in, and she had known Ruth was right, who had reorganized the closet and kept only what was hers, who had sat on the kitchen floor with her daughter and watched her reach for a yellow balloon and felt the most uncomplicated happiness she had ever known. She was that woman. She had always been that woman. It had just taken a year of falling and getting up and falling and getting up to remember it. Tell me about the job, Ruth said. And Claire did. She talked about it the way she talked about things that genuinely interested her. With movement, with energy, the specific aliveness of a person engaged with a problem that was actually theirs. She talked about the firm and the work and the challenge she had been given, that she had been turning over in her mind for 2 weeks because she could not help it, because this was how she was built, a person who started working on things the moment they arrived. Ruth listened. The tea went warm in their hands. The November night held them both in the kitchen, and in the next room, a 1-year-old girl with dark hair and her mother's nose breathed in and breathed out, and grew and was not defined by anything that had come before her, only by what was ahead, which was everything, which was entirely sufficient, which was, in the end, completely enough.
You just heard Claire's story, and if any part of it felt familiar, if any moment made you pause and think, I know that feeling, then this ending is for you. Claire did not fail. She did not fail when she drove 40 minutes across the city with takeout balanced on her passenger seat because she wanted to see her husband's face. She did not fail when she believed him. She did not fail when she stayed. She did not fail when she cleared the browser history at 3 in the morning and went back to bed and told herself everything was fine. She was surviving the way people survive when the truth costs more than they can afford to pay all at once. The way all of us survive at various points in our lives. by choosing the interpretation that lets us get through the day. There is no shame in that. There has never been any shame in that. But here is what Claire learned, and here is what this story is really about. Somewhere along the way, gradually, quietly, in 100 small decisions that each seemed reasonable in isolation, she had stopped taking up space. She had made herself smaller. She had adjusted herself around the edges of someone else's life and called it love. She had been grateful for things she should have simply expected. And she had done all of this so slowly, so carefully that she did not notice she was disappearing until she was standing in a parking garage watching a phone screen light up with her own name, and she understood. In the way you understand things you have been working very hard not to understand, that she had been invisible in her own life for a very long time. This is not a story about a bad man. It is a story about what happens to a woman when she forgets, or is never taught, or slowly unlearns that she is allowed to take up space. That her needs are not inconveniences, that her instincts are not overreactions, that the small voice in the bathroom at 3 a.m, the one she kept silencing by clearing the browser history and going back to bed, that voice was not anxiety. That voice was telling the truth. The most important moment in this story is not the parking garage. It is not the kitchen table confrontation. It is not the attorney's office or the divorce papers signed on a Tuesday in May. The most important moment in this story is the one that happened in a hospital closet at 2 a.m. when Claire sat on the floor, surrounded by things she was sorting into a donation pile, and she said out loud to the quiet house, "I deserved better than this," not as a complaint, not as a plea for someone to agree with her. As a fact, as a measurement, as the quiet, permanent correction of a belief she had been carrying wrong for 6 years. I deserved better than this. If you are listening to this today and something in Claire's story lives in you, if you recognize the cleared browser history, the pretending to be asleep, the phone checked 3 times and locked, the adjusting yourself smaller and smaller and calling it accommodation, then I want to say this to you directly. You are not overreacting. You are not crazy. You know what you saw. And the hardest part, the part that takes the most courage, is admitting you already knew. Not because knowing makes you responsible for what someone else chose to do, but because once you know, you get to choose too. Claire's freedom did not come from Nathaniel leaving. It came from the moment she stopped organizing her life around his absence. It came from the Tuesday in May, when she signed her name and walked out into the morning. It came from the closet, reorganization at 2 a.m, keeping only what was actually hers, releasing what had only ever been a performance. It came from the kitchen floor with her daughter and the yellow balloon and the photograph saved in a folder named Keep. It came, finally and completely, from the understanding that the door had been unlocked all along. She had the key the whole time. She just needed enough pain, enough honesty, enough time in the quiet of her own life to finally see it. Whatever parking garage you are standing in right now, whatever phone you are watching light up and go dark, whatever browser history you have cleared at 3 a.m. and gone back to bed, I want you to hear this. You are not disappearing. You are just standing still for a moment before you remember how to move. And when you are ready, you will get up. You will make a list. You will call the person who will run from 2 buildings over to be with you. You will sit in the parking structure for 12 minutes and then you will go in, and you will walk out the other side of it. Not the same as you were before, but not broken either. Clearer. More specifically yourself than you have been in years. More specifically yourself than you perhaps have ever been. That is what this story is about. Not revenge, not justice. A woman coming home to herself, and the truth that the key was always in her hand. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for giving Claire your time and your attention, and whatever piece of yourself you brought to this story, she carried it well, and so will you. This content was researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you stories of meaning, healing, and the kind of truth that takes courage to hear and even more courage to live. Every word was chosen with care for you